Your last page sort of is the outline of what we'll be talking about. But God sees, He hears the cries of His people, and God responds by choosing a person. And through His relationship with that person, the thing that qualifies that person to make a difference is, I will be with you. So, as I was thinking about that, how does God respond to the needs of creation in the world today? I think in many ways He seeks to respond the same way. I hear the cries of your neighbors. I see the needs of people in Syria. I see the suffering of kids in Africa. I see the problems of the world. I've heard their cries. And what does God say? I choose you. I choose you to be the solution. And once again, we would ask the same question. So how can we do that? And once again, God's answer, just as it was with Moses, is, I will be with you. And as I see that transition from Romans 7, where the focus is all about Paul trying to figure out what's wrong with himself, to the point where once he's done having to worry about himself, once he is led by the Spirit, once he's set free, then all of a sudden he can start to be part of the solution to the problem, and not just the problem that needs to be solved himself. So, the thing that with Moses, there was a new understanding of who God was that Moses got that hadn't been known before that. That God gave His name to Moses. Who should I say sent me? And God says, well, you could say, I am sent you. There was this whole new level of getting to know who God was that happened as Moses was sent to do this job. The thing that's amazing is that as God sends us to go and be His solution to the needs of the world, we're given even a deeper level of understanding who God is than Moses got. Moses just got to hear that God was I am. We get to understand God as who? God as Jesus, as our Father. And so we understand God's identity, and we also understand our identity as we're sent out to be the answer to the cries of the world. So today's theme is all of creation is waiting for people like us. And I think I'm to the notes if you follow them at this point. So all of creation is waiting for people like us, children of God. God has freed us. God has a purpose for us. But for us to start even entering into God's purposes, we need to be able to think differently. That if we're thinking primarily as sinners who are a problem that needs to be fixed, then we're not at a place where we're ready to be used by God to do anything. That we can't keep on defining ourselves anymore by being condemned. We can't be defining ourselves anymore by being the problem. That's why Romans 8 starts out, there is no more condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. It's time to start seeing yourself differently. It's time to start seeing God differently. It's time to start seeing your purpose in the world differently. That I think part of the problem of why the church, at least in the West, I think has lost a lot of people's attention, that they really don't see it as being much different than the rest of society, is that when your church is primarily about following rules, when your church is primarily about sinners trying to be forgiven and never really going past that, we can't really be the answer that the world needs. If the only part of the spectrum we ever travel is sinner forgiven, sinner forgiven, sinner forgiven, I think that was what I grew up thinking that was the whole spectrum of church life, was just bouncing around between that and never really seeing any bigger purpose for life. The world is not waiting. All creation is not longing for the revealing of forgiven sinners. But all of creation is waiting with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. And that's what Paul invites us to think about. Not this Paul, but I'm sure he would invite us to think about that. So, who is it that sent Moses? I had my little mnemonic device. I was bouncing back from the beginning of Exodus to Romans. And my little mnemonic device of when Moses asked God, who should I say sent me? And God says, I am. Those letters, I-A-M, are the letters that I want to invite you to think about tonight and throughout this week. about how if we're no longer defined by our sin, if we're no longer condemned, if we are children of God, if we are led by the Spirit, these three things are things that need to define first our identity, then our actions, I for identity, A for actions, M for motive. Would I say motive or motivation? Motivation. What's my motivation? Yeah. So just want to invite you to be thinking this week that God sees the cries of the people in your life, in your family, in your workplace, in your school, in your neighborhood. And his desired response is to talk to you and say, okay, you're the one that I want to use. But first we need to start to understand that I am. The first, identity. That it says, if we are led by the Spirit, we are children of God. So our primary identity is that we are children of God. And who is it that reminds us if we forget who we are? The Spirit testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. So if we've spent our whole Christian lives primarily seeing ourselves as either problems or sinners, or maybe even something that sounds noble like I'm the servant of the Lord, if that's been our whole picture of who we are, now Romans 8 invites us to take on a different identity. You're not the problem. You're not the sinner. You're not even that noble servant of God anymore. You're a child of God. And it's interesting to even look at that word child. There's different words for child in the Greek language depending on how old you are, from the little itty-bitty babies to the adults. Do you know which word is used in Romans 8? That we're supposed to be dependent itty-bitty babies of God, or we're supposed to be full-grown adult children of God? Which? It's always the second one. If you know my patterns, I'm not very creative. So the world isn't just waiting for us to be nice little cute children of God. The world is waiting for us to be those children of God who have gotten to know our Father's heart. We've gotten to know our Father's priorities. We've learned how to love. We've learned how to invest. We've learned how to take risks. And now we are the ones who are trusting that God's Spirit will lead us. We're trusting that God will communicate to us and work through us. So all of creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of these fully grown children of God, those who see themselves as part of God's work in the world. And I think I mentioned last week, the family business of God. That really what we're seeking to do is to not just have an audience watch what God is doing, but we're asking for our whole church to understand ourselves as those adult children of God who know our Father's heart, we know our Father's priorities, and we're willing to go out and do what God's doing in the world. So first, our identity. If you're having trouble seeing yourselves primarily as child of God, the one that God delights in, then pray this week that God's Spirit would whisper in your ear and testify to you who you are. That you're more than a problem, you're more than a sinner, you're more than even a servant of God. I mean, that's why I think Muslims have this glass ceiling. Because even the best Muslim, what's the highest thing they can become? Servant of God, slave of God. And as Christians, we have so much more of an understanding of God's heart and God's love. So, first of I am. I for identity. A for actions. We're Lutherans. We don't do actions. That's works, so we'll skip on to M. No. A, actions. Those who are led by the Spirit are children of God. That might be something that might be challenging for us. Because maybe we're good at following the rules, we're good at following the morality, but when it comes to actually saying, God, speak to me today. God, show me what you're doing today. God, open my ears to hear what you're saying today. Open my eyes to see what you're up to so I can join with you in what you're doing. Use me to touch people. Then when you pray for people, not be thinking I'm doing this because I have to because I'm a Christian, but that I'm a child of God, a son of God, a daughter of God, and when I'm praying for people, God's touching people. To just see that your life is something that's led by God. And I think that a lot of that change of mentality that happens as we go into Romans 8 is, I think up to Romans 7, it's the whole point is, what do I need to be freed from? Oh God, who will free me from this wretched body? And once you understand that you've been forgiven, what is your freedom for? It's not, what am I free from? But now as we get into being led by the Spirit, what's the question? What am I free for? So, as we're led by the Spirit for a purpose. So our identity, our actions are all about, what am I free for? I'm free for my neighbor. That's what Luther would say. That we're free to serve our neighbor. So, identity, actions, and the last one is motivation. That it says in there, you didn't receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received a spirit of adoption. And I get concerned that many Christians, what are their main motivations? Motivated by fear, motivated by shame, motivated by guilt, motivated by good works, motivated by having other people watch you and be impressed by you, motivated by a whole lot of things. But what we're invited to do when we're led by the Spirit is, what did Paul talk about in 1 Corinthians 13? That when we are led by the Spirit, when we know who we are, what's to be the atmosphere that defines what we do? Without love, it's worth nothing. So we're invited, I just want to invite you during this week, during your prayer time, to think what motivates you. Are you motivated to live the Christian life out of guilt? Are you motivated to live the Christian life out of the shame of your past? Are you motivated to live the Christian life because you're afraid of what other people think of you or what God thinks of you? Are you motivated because somehow you think you can do enough, if you just work hard enough to make God impressed with you? That really the call of those who are led by the Spirit, who are children of God, is to be motivated by love. And it's not something that we love first, and then we hope God will love us. But it's we can love others because of what? Because God first loved us. So what does the Spirit do? The Spirit pours God's love into our hearts, it says in Romans 5. So if you're having trouble being motivated by love, if you're motivated by fear or guilt or shame, take some time to pray this week. That, Lord, help me to see myself as a child of God. Help me to be led by the Spirit and not by my own selfish motives. To be led for the sake of blessing people and not just watching out for myself. And help me to be defined by love, so that I start seeing people around me the way that you see them. That I don't serve people just because I'm afraid of going to hell, but I serve people because I know that I'm going to heaven, that I'm already in relationship with God. So that's your homework this week, if you want to take some time. That God has a design, just like with Moses. He hears the cries of the world. He sees the needs of our neighbors. He sees the cries of our world. And what's his answer? I choose you. I keep wanting to say Pikachu after that, but only young people would know what that is. So, I choose you. And the way it's going to work is, I will be with you. God pours out his Spirit into us. We're led by the Spirit. So, now the question is, what identity will we carry? Will we carry servant of God, problem? What actions will we do? Just actions that are all about ourselves? Or free to serve those around us? And what motivation will we share? Just motivation to avoid being punished, or motivation to share love? Amen.